has hundreds of millions of dollars been skimmed at the top at the military and intelligence levels of the United States and Cairo.
For sure.
On the next Jack Anderson Confidential, we'll investigate charges that top U.S. and Egyptian military and intelligence officials have swindled millions from the U.S. military aid program. Also, the Maverick missile program, a $5 billion boondoggle. On the next Jack Anderson Confidential, we'll expose widespread corruption in U.S. military aid to Egypt. I'm Jack Anderson. Join me on our next program.
I tried to save her. They said I killed her.
Dr. Jeffrey McDonald, in prison for the grisly slaughter of his wife and 2 children, a crime he might not have committed. The Savannah River nuclear plant, a sitting target for terrorists. Menachem Begin, one of the most controversial men in the world, a psychological profile. These stories coming up on Jack Anderson Confidential. Now from his Washington office, here is Jack Anderson.
I've conducted my own investigation of the massacre in Lebanon. Some of the details are still obscure, but here apparently is what happened. Not all the PLO fighters were evacuated from Lebanon. Thousands went underground. Left-wing guerrillas continued to operate inside the country. They were armed and dangerous. The Israelis were under world pressure not to resume the fighting, so they decided to use the Lebanese Christian militia to clean out the guerrillas. Israeli intelligence warned Prime Minister Menachem Begin that the mop-up operation could get out of control, that both Christians and Palestinians had been massacred in the past, that another massacre was possible. Certainly the Israelis did not encourage the massacre, but they ignored the warning. They let the Christian militiamen into the Palestinian camps. The Israelis knew the killing was going on. It continued for 30 hours. They even set up canteens and served food and drink to the killers. But the Israelis thought the gunfire was between the militiamen and the guerrillas. Now, I've spoken with some top Israelis. Privately, they're anguished. They blame Prime Minister Begin. It was his responsibility, they say, to prevent the slaughter. They tell me he has betrayed Israel. Later, a psychological profile of Menachem Begin. But first, a murder mystery when I return.
If in all the world you could have only one source of news and information, what would you want it to be? Think about that for a second. Only one source of news and information. What would it be? If you say Time magazine, you're not alone. More than 29 million people all over the world turn to Time's lively pages each week to catch up on what's new and what's news everywhere in every field. With writing so fresh and pictures so colorful, you enjoy every minute and start looking forward to the next issue. When? Time is back again with the latest books and movies. What's happening with sports, business, and people, and what may happen next. In all, Time gives you 30 exciting departments of news and ideas. And now, Time makes one of its biggest offers ever. 26 weeks of Time for less than 79 cents an issue. Over 45% off Time's cover price. Payable in 3 easy installments of $6.77. So call, toll free, 1-800-621-3024. Oh, by the way, with your paid subscription, we'll also send you Time's Desk Reference Library, the Webster Dictionary, Roget's Thesaurus, and the Signet Hammond World Atlas, free. Call 1-800-621-3024. Get Time's Desk Reference Library, free. and time for 3 easy installments of $6.77. Our operators are standing by. Remember, Time is over 45% off, and the reference library, all 3 books, is free.
A human tragedy, but also a disturbing puzzle with many unresolved questions. Did Jeffrey McDonald, a Princeton-educated Green Beret doctor, brutally slay his pregnant wife Colette and his 2 small daughters, Kimberly, age 5, and Kristen, age 2, in the early morning hours of February 17, 1970? My associate Don Goldberg has spent 6 months investigating the case. He's uncovered new evidence which raises serious doubts about a 1979 jury verdict, which found McDonald guilty of 3 counts of murder. It was 1970, the era of drugs and cults. Just 6 months earlier, Charles Manson led his group of young followers to commit bloody ritual murders. Now the family of a Special Forces captain was found viciously stabbed and beaten to death with an ice pick, 2 knives, and a club.
I remember struggling. I remember I couldn't get my hands free. Something was tied up in my hands. It turned out later somehow my pajama top had been either ripped from around me or pulled over my head during the struggle. And I heard some things. I heard acid is groovy, hit him again. I heard words, and it was a struggle, and it sounded like it was very loud to me because I could still hear Colette, and I was trying to get to Colette.
McDonald was convicted of the crime in 1979 after a long and complicated legal battle.
The next thing, I was at the end of the couch, off the couch, lying in the end of the hallway. And as strange as it sounds, the next thing I remember was my teeth were chattering. And I remember the screams. So I got up and, excuse me, and went down into the bedroom and saw my wife. The wounds were unbelievable. There was blood everywhere. The entire house was covered with blood. I gave my wife mouth to mouth. And the air was coming out of her chest. I tried to save her. They said I killed her with no evidence because they couldn't find the people. They never looked for them. My wife and I were happy, happier than we'd ever been in our life. We had 2 beautiful children. I'm sane. I'm a loving husband. I was then, and I'm a good person now. I've never changed.
Just months after the murders, the Army cleared McDonald of any involvement in the crime. Yet some people became bitter over the decision. McDonald's former in-laws, Alfred and Mildred Kassab, pressured the Justice Department to continue the investigation. No new evidence turned up, but McDonald was brought to trial and convicted more than 9 years after the murders.
Mr. Kassab, Mrs. Kassab, did Jeff McDonald kill Colette and his 2 children?
Without a shadow of a doubt.
Why are you so sure?
Because over the years I've reviewed the evidence very, very carefully, and I have always stated that no jury in the world would ever bring in a not guilty verdict. There was no way. The evidence is just too strong.
There were no witnesses. The evidence is certainly circumstantial.
But what do you consider? Circumstantial evidence is stronger than factual evidence, actually. In other words, circumstantial evidence, I'm saying a woman says she saw a man across the street committed a murder. She can identify the man because she saw him. That is the worst kind of evidence in the world.
You told us earlier, Mrs. Kassab, that you'd like to see Jeff squirm. Don't you have a personal vendetta against him?
Of course, wouldn't you?
Although no motive was ever shown, the single most damaging piece of evidence against MacDonald was his tattered and bloody pajama top. The prosecution claimed MacDonald used it to cover his wife's body while stabbing her. James Dothett was MacDonald's Army counsel in 1970. He now has a private practice in Roanoke, Virginia.
The pajama top, I may be wrong, but I never could figure out how that proved that much. If I take a sheet of cloth and I put a random number of holes in it, it looks like to me I can fold it any number of ways to any pattern. And there are any number of ways I can fold it to no patterns. I don't think that proved a thing.
Tens of thousands of pages of legal documents, statements, briefs, and reports have been filed in the federal courthouse in Raleigh, North Carolina. But last month, the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals turned down an appeal that vital evidence was excluded from the trial. Most of that evidence related to Helena Stokely.
We got out to the house and went walking around the back, got in after jimmying the lock because the door was stuck. We went walking inside and Dr. MacDonald was laying down on the couch. He apparently had been reading something because the book was turned upside down on him and his reading glasses were on the coffee table. The TV was on, but it was off the air.
Helena Stokely was a member of a black witchcraft cult in the Fort Bragg area in 1970. She claims that members of her cult, several of whom knew MacDonald from the Army, were angry at the doctor because he wouldn't supply them with drugs. And on February 17th, they intended to teach him a lesson.
We simply discussed the fact that he was giving us a hard time and that someone did have to have a talk with him. And they were just going to rough him up a little or something like that.
And is that what happened that night?
No.
Although Helena Stokely now claims she was present during the murders, her memory was not so clear at MacDonald's 1979 trial.
In 1979, I was afraid that I was going to go to prison.
Well, why should we believe you now?
You don't have to believe me. I'm just trying to keep an innocent man from being in prison.
Helena Stokely, afraid of placing herself under suspicion, testified that she didn't remember the events of that night. Her erratic courtroom behavior and history of drug use led Judge Franklin Dupree to call her a burned-out drug freak who could not be considered reliable. Any evidence suggesting that Helena was present during the murders was not allowed. Now, there are many people who disagree with Judge Dupree and feel that Helena Stokely, though admittedly a woman with a checkered past, was a part of the murders.
I knew her when she was an informant for another detective in the fire squad down there when she was 15 years old.
Prince Beasley was a detective with the Fayetteville, North Carolina Vice Squad for more than 20 years.
I have never known Helena to lie to me. She has always been truthful.
Do you believe her, that she was a part of the MacDonald murders?
I certainly believe every word Helena says.
I do believe that she's sufficiently free of mental illness that she deserves to be heard.
Dr. Rex Bieber, a forensic psychologist with the University of California at Los Angeles, is recognized in his field as one of the nation's most respected experts. He examined Helena Stokely for 5 hours.
I find no data about her personality, about her prior behavioral and social history to in any way indicate that she's prone to lie or fantasize or has any inability to distinguish lies from fantasies, or that she is unable to appreciate the gravity of this situation and the special duty imposed on her to tell the truth.
But there's definite, compelling evidence corroborating Helena Stokely's story. Item 1, this rocking horse, a toy of one of the MacDonald children. Helena knew this rocking horse had a broken spring, a fact that she could not have known from the newspapers, a fact that had never been made public. Item 2,